I've always thought of using tarot or oracles as having the wisdom of a sage available to me 24/7. They help us find answers to questions we have difficulty answering for ourselves, though sometimes knowing what questions to ask is a problem in and of itself. And this is where Dynamic Spreads deck comes into play, as they assist us in knowing what to ask. Together, it's a powerful combination. This video is geared towards people who know little or nothing at all about tarot or oracles, and after watching it, I think you'll see how easy it is to do, and hopefully you'll be excited to try it out for yourself. We're going to use an intuitive approach that has no rules, but does have some guidelines. Before we start with any deck, let's see how we could do a reading if we only had an art book at our disposal. We're going to address a hypothetical scenario. There's something that's been bothering you. Why do I feel unhappy in my relationship, even though it seems like everything is fine? You open the art book to some random page, and this is the image that you see. So here are your guidelines. Note the first emotion you feel when you see this. Scan the artwork and pay attention to what grabs your attention, especially little odd things you pick up. Describe what you're seeing, knowing that there's absolutely no right or wrong answers. Now, pause the video if you want to give this a try. So, what might you see? Well, a family outside. It looks like it could be a picnic, but it seems like an odd place to have one. Not very cozy. It feels like an intimate setting, but yet they're on the side of the road where everyone can see them. And I see a mob approaching them. I guess if I look carefully, I notice that it's a group of maybe churchgoers walking down the road. I don't know why, but I also couldn't help notice that dirty little spot on the upper right corner of the painting. And for some reason, my attention wants to go to that little book the man is holding. The way he's holding it is odd. It's like he doesn't want it and is trying to pass it off to the woman on his right. Or maybe that's his wife. But she doesn't seem interested in it as well. I guess, I don't know, maybe it's a Bible. Let's stop for a second. We've told a little story about this piece of art, and we've noted the weird things that came to mind as we looked at it. And if you paused the video to try it for yourself, most likely you came up with a very different story and noticed different things. That's good. That's how this works. Now let's see how this information you received from this artwork relates to your question. Well, the family that is sitting on the road, as if having a picnic, should be in a more private and beautiful setting. This reminds you of how your spouse is less of a romantic than you are. If it's convenient to stop and eat on the side of the road, he'd do that, as opposed to being a little more thoughtful and finding a nice setting. The churchgoers, that originally felt like a mob coming up the street, remind you of his family that likes to drop by unannounced. And the dirty spot on the corner, it brings to mind how you sometimes feel like your house is not clean enough for them. The book in the man's hand, well, that reminds you of a rule book, and it feels like he's passing it to you and you don't want it either. As if he's telling you there are things you should be doing that you're not. As you talk about all of this, what's coming together for you is that you haven't paid enough attention to little things that have been bothering you, but you thought they were insignificant. And you're sensing that collectively, these little things may be adding up, and that's not a good thing. You're starting to think a healthy conversation with your spouse is in order. Okay, we'll stop here. Let's summarize what we did. We had a question, and then we picked up an art book and opened it to some random page. We described what impressions came to mind and how they made us feel. We didn't care about what the artist had in mind or what a critic would see, and we especially took note of the odd thoughts that seemed to come out of the blue. The page within the art book was a tool for answering the question. We used it to explore our inner mind. And finally, we made associations from those thoughts and feelings that arose to the context of our question. This technique allowed our unconscious mind to express itself and be heard. Let's take what we learned and apply it to a reading with an oracle deck. We're going to use one of my favorites, the Deck of Shadows by Scott Grossberg. The oracle deck will be our tool for answering our question. It will help us extract the wisdom we seek. To help us pose the right questions, we'll use the Dynamic Spreads deck. It contains a wealth of questions we can pose, including flexible, open-ended ones. They're reminders of the various parts of our life that may require attention and thoughtful introspection. I've removed the cards from the box. We're looking at the back sides, and we can see they're grouped into different categories. So let's briefly go through them. The cards from the theme category pose broad questions associated with major aspects of our life. For example, this one asks about general work and career concerns. It's like asking, what do I need to know about my work or career? The 4 categories in green represent areas to explore more specifically. The questions are more focused. For example, the Explore Me cards pose questions that help you look inward, like this one that asks, what do I need to learn? Explore Group Interactions looks at any kind of relationship with other people, whether it's personal, very personal, or business. Here's one that looks at boundaries, where you look at which ones are beneficial versus not so helpful. Explore Considerations has questions to support creative solutions to examine, like this one that asks, what's the best way to adapt to the situation? And Explore Actions looks at how to engage, either mentally or physically. Here's one that looks at ways in which to give help versus receiving help. And finally, the conclusion cards have questions for receiving advice or likely outcomes, like this one, which has a fill in the blank. Perhaps you have someone you admire, you've read all their books, and you wonder how this person would advise you with regards to your issue or questions. You'll notice we have some small cards too. They're optional and can be used to focus on certain time frames or situations where we have choices to make. We'll cover those in another video. Next, we're going to put it all together. We'll create what's known as a spread, which is just a grouping of questions, and then we'll use the oracle cards to do the reading. There are 2 ways to select the spread cards for our reading. The most obvious is to look through them and find one that's interesting. This is an active selection or conscious choice. The second way is a passive selection or an unconscious choice. And this is what I did prior to making the video. I shuffled the theme cards and selected one without looking. Now, while I'm shuffling, I like to quiet my mind and focus on my objective. In this case, my objective was to showcase an interesting topic for the video. And this is the one I received. If we're looking into the area of life in need of attention, I thought it could be interesting to then look at questions from the Explore Me category. And this is the card I passively selected. And finally, to round it out from Explore Action, I shuffled and randomly drew this card. Now we have our spread, and this looks like an interesting set of questions. Next, I grabbed the Oracle deck, the Deck of Shadows by Scott Grossberg, shuffled and randomly chose 4 cards, 1 for each question. Let's begin the reading, and we'll use the same techniques we used earlier in this video. Well, I see refusal first, and I notice the other words as well, but I'm drawn to worthy more than choice or interdiction. And I'm looking at the image in the center, and I see the man that appears very open. His arms are wide, his legs are stretched, where she's covering herself up and her body is in a closed-off position. Looks like a big tree behind her and makes me think of growth and branching, like branching off into new areas. Not sure why this thought occurred, but I'm not censoring the impressions I feel, and that's important during this process. So now I want to put my thoughts into context of this implicit question, the area of life in need of attention. Well, I do know that I sometimes turn away options that I think I'll not be successful at. And if I really think about it, there are times I say no, partly because I think I'm afraid of what might happen if I say yes. So let's take a look at the next spread card, and we'll start off with the question regarding what I'm open to. How interesting. The first word I see is worthy, and that was also a word in the other card. Good and gratitude also feel significant. Not so sure about heaven, so I'll set that aside. But I see two angels carrying someone who looks like they are passed out. No, when I look closer, I'm thinking they're asleep. I'm actually identifying with the sleeping person. I like how easy it must feel to be transported from one place to another. It's a breeze. When I apply this story to the implicit question, what am I open to, it takes me no time to realize how much I like feeling that my work is good. And when I feel worthy and receive gratitude, it just all feels so easy. But all of a sudden I'm seeing the wing on the bottom of the card, and now I feel like I have a better way of expressing it. It's like I have wings on when I know I'm capable and worthy, and the smiles on people's faces when I manifest something for them. Well, everything becomes so easy and effortless. I feel light as a feather. So now let's take a look at what I'm closed off to. I first spot the word no. It feels a bit like the childish cross your arms kind of no. And I see a naked woman in the picture, and it feels like there's a spotlight on her. She's covering her eyes because she feels exposed to public scrutiny. I think there's a man sitting behind her, and he's looking at her backside, and for some reason I'm thinking she's not liking this, as she thinks that side of her body is flawed, and she wasn't expecting people to be viewing her from all angles. And then there's that man who unveiled her. He unveiled her before she was ready. So when I apply this story to the question, what am I closed off to, I can see how I'm closed off to anything where I feel like I may get judged or I may be assessed prematurely. And now for our final spread card, how to strengthen my self-esteem. This should be interesting. I see a woman outdoors that's almost in a state of bliss, and I feel a strong pull towards the word creativity. It's like she's looking and leaning upwards towards the sky where her creativity lies. And with this focus and passion, she can't possibly be listening to naysayers or those who might distract her from her vision of what feels right. The message feels really clear. While there are different strategies for strengthening your self-esteem, here we feel the approach is about putting the blinders on, focusing on your creativity and making your vision happen. Don't allow fear of worthiness or fear of being judged to enter in the process. Just keep yourself cocooned inside your creativity. Let's summarize this reading. Both the spread cards and oracle cards were selected passively. That is to say, no peeking was involved. And it seemed almost magical how they came together to provide a cohesive and interesting set of questions and the right images to help us find the answers. Starting with the theme card, we discovered our potential for growth was being stunted. Next, by looking at what we're open to versus closed off from, the message was clear that fear of being judged and a sense of worthiness was the culprit. And because we chose an action card, we set the intention for wanting to uncover how to move forward. The answer was elegantly simple. Growth will follow when we cocoon ourselves in the joy of creativity. By looking upwards and forwards towards what brings joy, you can avoid looking downwards and backwards towards those whose opinions are theirs and not yours. We've done a lot in just a few minutes. I hope you can see how the desire to seek, asking the right questions, and using a tool like an Oracle deck can be rather extraordinary. And that concludes this tutorial. Bye.